All right, good morning. Welcome back to Queens Borough Hall for a meeting of the Queens Borough Cabinet. We have two items on our agenda today, both relating to the reopening that is underway. We are, as you know, in phase one, and we do anticipate going into phase two as quickly, however, as safely as possible. Today, we are joined by representatives from the New York City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, as well as the New York City Department of Buildings. But before we jump into the agenda, two items that I'd like to remind our members of the cabinet. We have, of course, our all-important census. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing on the community boards and within the community districts to get the census count out. We are still not anywhere near our goal, and so anything you can do or anything you'd like to do, we are ready and willing and able to do what you need. Also, today is a deadline for the application for an absentee ballot. There is a primary election underway as we speak. Early voting has begun as of last Saturday, but today is the deadline to apply for an absentee ballot. Everyone is eligible to check box number 2, which is the potential of COVID to justify using an absentee ballot, thanks to the governor's executive order. But to apply for the absentee ballot, you can go to nycabsentee.com. It takes 3 minutes. You can probably do it over the course of this meeting if you haven't already. And then also two upcoming events that I'd like to bring to your attention. We've got a Pride Month celebration at Queens Borough Hall virtual, and that will be this Thursday, June 18 at 2 p.m. at queensbp.org. Also, we will have our another job fair, a virtual job fair next Wednesday at 2 p.m. as well. We've been holding job fairs every 3 weeks, and the responses have been encouraging, but we still have a long way to go. And so with that, we'll jump right in. So from the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, as you know, they protect and enhance the daily economic lives of New Yorkers to create thriving communities. They, in particular, protect the marketplace from predatory practices and strives to create a culture of compliance on the part of many of the businesses. And especially in a time of pandemic and crisis, we have seen some unscrupulous actions of folks taking advantage of people's particular vulnerabilities at a time of crisis. So we appreciate all the work that the agency is doing. With us this morning is the Director of Community Affairs, Tanjila Rahman, and she is accompanied by Community Affairs Associate Miriam Aldana. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Acting Borough President Sharon Lee. I'd just like to thank the Queens Borough President's Office for having us here today to provide some important updates on phase one guidelines and reopening. So my name is Tanjila Rahman. I work for the New York City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Miriam Aldana, Community Affairs Associate from the New York City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. So just a few updates regarding phase one. So as a reminder, New York City, we entered phase one last Monday, 8th, and they are
We're having trouble hearing you.
Ms. Rahman? The audio is coming in and out. Ms. Rahman, we are unable to hear you.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. So under phase one, agriculture, forestry, fishing, hunting, construction, manufacturing are allowed to reopen. And for retail, only curbside or in-store pickup or drop-off only. Keep in mind that retail businesses that can reopen for curbside or in-store pickup or drop-off only include stores that sell clothing, electronics and appliances, office supplies, shoes, sporting goods, hobby supplies, used merchandise, jewelry, luggage, leather goods, general merchandise, and furniture and health and personal care items. So if you are covered, in any of these, industries, it's really important that you follow industry-specific guidelines that the New York State issued. That's available on the New York State's website, forward.ny.gov. And it's really important that workers, if you work at a covered business, that you understand what, the requirements are and the guidelines for the employer. So employers, they must post a safety plan at their work site where everyone can see it. They have to conduct an employee health screening every day. And they have to give workers free face coverings and provide replacements. If any business is looking for free face coverings, they could visit the Small Business Services website where they have locations, to provide free face coverings for businesses. In addition, employers, they also have to provide and maintain hand hygiene stations for personnel and regularly clean shared equipment and frequently touched surfaces. And they also have to post signs and put tape and, other markers to show where people stand, and require, customers to wear a face covering when they are less than 6 feet, from others. Our agency, we actually launched a worker protection hotline. So workers, they can call 311 or 212-436-0381 and ask for the worker protection hotline if they have any questions about reopening, health and safety guidelines for the workplace, or if they have questions about which businesses are allowed to reopen and requirements. Again, the hotline, the worker protection hotline, New Yorkers can call 311 or 212-436-0381. And also, it's important to know that employers, there's also a small business hotline, and they could call. It's 888-727-4692. So it's 888-727-4692, or they could visit nyc.gov/business for more information. So there's two hotlines that were launched, one for workers and one for employers. Just, like I said, New York State has issued industry-specific health and safety guidelines that outline requirements as well as best practices for reopening. And the website for employers to visit for full guidelines for the industry is forward.ny.gov. And just a few things. So if there are businesses that are reopening and, they're not defined to reopen under phase one, or, they're not complying with the New York State, the New York State guidelines, there is, New Yorkers can call 311 and state business reopening complaint. They could also go in the portal, portal.311.ny.gov to report file a complaint, against a business that is not defined to reopen under phase one, or not following the New York State guidelines. So that's about it. Those are just the quick updates. And then, our agency, we created a lot of new educational resources for workers, including, what workers should know about reopening, and just frequently asked questions for New York City workers. They're all available on our website at nyc.gov/workers. And we're going to have it available in multiple languages as well. And I think that's about it. Just my quick updates regarding phase one. I'm happy to take any questions from the participants. So I guess let us know if there's any specific questions regarding, our presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Rahman, for that brief presentation. The participants or your audience are the district managers of the Queens
Yes.
Community Boards. Could you repeat those two numbers? So you said there's the Worker
Yep.
Protection Hotline. What was that now?
So the easiest way is just to call 311 and ask for the Worker Protection Hotline. And if they have any questions about reopening, health and safety guidelines for the workplace, or just like other, guidelines, like what employers should know about, they could just call 311, or the number is 212-436-0381. And then employers, they can call a small business hotline at 888-727-4692, or they could visit nyc.gov/businesses. So those are the two important hotline numbers. And I also mentioned there is a business reopening complaint portal on 311. So New Yorkers can report a business that is not, that's non-essential and they're not allowed to reopen under phase 1, but they are open. Or if business is not following the, the guidelines that were issued by the New York State.
Great. And you mentioned that you've had numerous calls already. Actually, for the two hotlines, are those 24/7?
So you could call it, and I think if you leave if it's after office hours, we will definitely call people back if they leave voicemails. So yeah, anyone can call, and then if they leave like a voicemail, then we'll have staff that'll call them back.
What are your office hours for the two hotlines?
9 to 5 p.m.
And is that Monday through Friday or 7 days?
Yes. That's Monday through Friday.
And what's the average turnaround time for a response once we leave a message?
Usually, our staff, our Office of Labor Policy and Standards staff, we have a team of, agency staff that's helping out with the hotline. So we try to get back to individuals, within a day, within a weekday, like if they call, during the weekday. So
within 24, within 24 hours?
Yeah, we can follow up regarding the callback, response time, but we do have a lot of people helping out. And last week, we had a high call volume, and lots of questions were asked about reopening, and we wanted to make sure that, workers feel safe and they know what the employer's responsibility is, and just like any important guidelines, for them on like the laws, and just like paid sick leave, COVID testing, and just like other important information that workers need to be aware of, when they're going back to work. So we want to ensure that businesses and workers, as they transition into phase 1, that everyone is, given all of the resources and, tools needed for them to reopen.
What were the top 3 questions from Queens when the hotline launched?
For the hotline, we could get back to you regarding like the top questions for Queens. But I know some of the questions that were asked were just about the safety plans and like the health screenings and the free face coverings, as well as just like requiring, customers to wear face masks, when they're less than 6 feet from others. Also just questions about workers not sure if they, if they're considered under phase 1, if they have to go back to work, and just, just other information about city workplace laws.
Great. To the cabinet members, if there are any questions, I'm going to ask that you use the reaction function in the Zoom application to like raise your hand or do a thumbs up, and just to signal. Do we have any questions from the cabinet?
I see Community Board 1 has a question.
Yes, Florence Caloris of Board 1. Could you unmute yourself, Ms. Caloris?
Thank you very much, Madam Borough President, for everything you do for our borough. We greatly appreciate you and your staff. Good morning, and thank you for being here. I have a question about taking care of the staff when they come back to the office. I understand that you are providing masks to the businesses, and I also understand that some businesses are taking temperatures and things of that sort. The equipment for the staff to come back is very difficult to find, whether it's masks, hand sanitizer, or thermometers. Are you helping these businesses to get that equipment that they need?
So I know that the city of New York, they're distributing 2 million face coverings citywide to small businesses and their employees as we're reopening the local economy. And there's also additional resources for workers and employers. So we could, we're working with the New York City Small Business Services, to see and working with the local business improvement districts to see, what additional resources that they may need. And so we can put you in touch with SBS as they are, working with the businesses to distribute the face coverings and just, assess what other needs are needed from the employer. So we could, following up, we can, definitely connect you guys to Small Business Services.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Florence.
Any other questions from the cabinet? Ms. Rahman, one of the concerns I'm hearing from a lot of the businesses, in particular the small businesses along the eastern end of our borough, is losing customers to Nassau. Nassau is ahead of us in the reopening, and they're in what, phase 2 or they're in phase 2. A lot of the retail and services industries, whereas we are still in phase 1, and there is a concern about the unleveled playing field and losing business and losing out on the competition. Is there anything that your agency is doing to help remedy that?
Oh, for businesses. So, with the phases, I know every region in New York State, they're entering different phases under the governor's guidelines, and just taking safety measures. We're working with our city agencies to make sure that our small businesses are supported and have the proper tools and resources to ensure like a smooth transition, and just making sure that workers, understand like resources that they have, as businesses reopen. As I mentioned, we could definitely put you in touch with Small Business Services, our sister agency, to see if there's any additional support for our local merchants, as they reopen under the different, under phase 1, and like what tools are needed for them.
Borough President, you're still muted.
I said, just to put on your radar, Eastern Queens, in particular, North and South East Queens, are concerned about losing business to Nassau.
Okay. All right. We'll definitely follow up regarding.
And that's a unique problem that we have in Queens that the other boroughs don't. Well, Bronx might with its proximity to Westchester, but Nassau and Queens are right there, and a lot of our businesses are feeling that very acutely.
Yeah. Okay. And you're referring to like the businesses that have opened under phase 1, or businesses that were already open?
These are businesses that would qualify that are under phase 2, but are unable to open.
Okay.
In Queens, but have opened in Nassau, right? So a lot of service industries. Yeah.
Okay.
Which has exacerbated a bit of the competition. We have a question from Ms. Markell of Board 2.
Sorry about that. Good morning. Thank you, Madam Borough President, and for all you do, and to my colleagues. Just to piggyback on what the Borough President just stated, that they are, I know hair places, beauty parlors, salons, hair cutters, they're losing a lot of business to other parts of the boroughs. In Westchester, Nassau, and I know that they're upset. And do you have protocols for the hair places, hair cutters, hair places in place for them to follow?
Yeah, so for every phase, there are New York State guidelines, industry-specific guidelines, for specific phases. Currently, we are in phase one. Once phase two, when that happens, there will be, industry-specific guidelines that the governor issued, New York State, guidelines for their business that they have to comply by. In addition to like the Department of Health guidelines, like posting safety plans, giving employees free face coverings, training employees on like hygiene and safety practices. So yeah, there are going to be guidelines for businesses as they reopen in different phases.
Any other
Can all of
questions?
I'm sorry, can all of the boards get a copy of those guidelines so we can post them to our website?
Yeah, I could share the
Share
link.
them with our bids and small business areas?
Yeah, we could share, like for the latest guidelines, there's specific industry ones. So I could share with you what we have right now for phase one. And then for phase two, we don't have a set date, for the second phase of reopening, but there are important guidelines that are on the Department of Health's website for like hair salons and barber shops, offices, and commercial building management. So I'm going to put the link in the chat box right now for all the district managers.
We have a question from Mr. McMillan of Board 13.
Good morning, Borough President. Just to get back to your previous comment, there's a part of my district that on one side of the street is Nassau, the other is Queens. The problem with doing anything like that is where you draw the line. Now, the only way that we're going to be able to stay competitive with someone across the street is if we're within the same confines of a county. And unfortunately, the way the governor is doing it and the way the city was affected compared to Nassau County, there's no way that we can actually open up because we still are attached to New York City. Now, I don't know where you push the borderline back, but at some point, wherever you push the borderline back, that same issue is going to be present. I've heard the same thing you've heard as well, but I think we're just going to have to kind of tough it out until July. I don't know what the city can do because it's the state that really handles this sort of scenario and the governor who's making these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's certainly a delicate balance of the reopening, and it's a moving target too, to a large extent. The governor is aiming to, or we are hoping to enter into phase two, and by we I mean the city of New York is trying to enter into phase two by next Monday, but it really depends on whether we can meet all the metrics that can ensure our safety and doesn't compromise people's health and again safety. So, but it's really hard to say to a lot of the business owners. They've been out of business for over 3 months now.
Yeah.
I think 2 months was tolerable for a lot of the businesses, especially in particular the smaller businesses. But 3 months, 4 months, that's going to be very tough.
Well, perhaps a phone call to Governor Cuomo by yourself would kind of push things forward to tell him we have some issues here.
Sure. We've been talking every day in the control room.
Okay.
Any other questions from the cabinet? Great. Thank you, Ms. Rahman and Ms. Aldana, for joining us this morning and for your presentation and for answering all of our questions. And of course, for your service to the City of New York. You are welcome
Thank
to
you so
stay for
much
the rest of the
for-
meeting. You're absolutely welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but we know your time is precious. And again, we thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, Borough President. Thank you to all the district managers here today. We'll be sure to follow up on, on some of the questions and connect you guys to our sister agency, Small Business Services, that has additional resources for businesses. Thank you.
Great. Have a great day. Up next, we have the Department of Buildings from the City of New York. Everyone knows DOB very, very well, sometimes all too well. And we all know Anthony Uliano from DOB. He is no stranger to every one of our boards across Queens. But the Department of Buildings, of course, protects people who work, build, live in the city. They are the regulatory, they regulate the lawful use of over 1 million buildings and construction sites across the 5 boroughs. We have a small portion of that here in Queens. And so again, we are joined by Anthony Uliano, Deputy Director of the Office of Community Engagement for DOB, who is here to deliver an update for us on the agency's very busy response to COVID-19, in particular, now that we are in phase 1. I'm sure there's a lot of work and a lot of demands on the department during phase 1. Good morning, Mr. Uliano. Welcome back. Floor is yours.
Good morning, Madam Borough President. I appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words, and I appreciate all your support for our agency and having a great working relationship. I think in comparison sometimes to the other boroughs, I think it kind of works out well here. So thank you for that. And thank you for all you do. And thank you also to the district managers who during this time have been really stepping up in a large way, still reaching out to us. We appreciate that. We're one of the few agencies, I think, in the city of New York that during this time where just about the entire agency is working remotely, was still very active. Prior to phase 1 opening up, our agency was tasked with the responsibility of making sure that the contractors or anyone looking to do work was in compliance with the governor's work order or non-work order, if you want to phrase it that way, because unless they were deemed essential construction, they could not perform any type of construction activity. But now, since June 8th, we have transitioned into phase 1, and our agency in transitioning with that is tasked with the responsibility of making sure that the construction sites, which, just to let you know, throughout the 5 boroughs, there are just shy of 34,000 construction sites with active work permits, that those contractors and developers are working in compliance with the safety requirements that have been instituted.
Mr. Uliano,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
I know that you had a PowerPoint
Yes.
deck that you wanted to accompany your presentation. Would you like
Mhm.
for us to turn that on
Yeah,
now or
if
hold
you
it?
can. No, you can turn that on now. I appreciate that. Yeah, if they can do that, that will help.
Borough Hall team, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. We're having problems on my end because they gave us a different laptop to kind of work with in doing our job here. And part of the problem is, like, one, I can't even get the video up, so I'm trying to dodge anyone with my video. But I'm not trying to give Nassau County my business and go get a haircut over the borderline. So I'm trying to hold out to stay with a Queens barber.
Keep the business in Queens.
That's it. So,
Keep that money in Queens.
people are saying that I look a lot like Moses now. So, but I'll clean that up when I get a chance.
Is that why your video is conveniently unavailable?
That might be part of it. Yeah.
Mr. Eliana, just prompt us when you'd like for us to change the slides.
Thank you. Yeah, so we are in phase 1 right now, and we're actively monitoring the construction sites here in the city of New York. Now, they're working on what's called cycles, and they're inspecting all 34,000 locations. And so what's happening is it'll take about roughly 7 to 8 days to complete a cycle. The cycle should run about 4 cycles. The first month, we're really looking to see if we can make sure that the sites and locations are complying with the safety requirements, social distancing, obviously, having a safety plan at all the job sites with the general contractor. They have to post the safety plan of the job site in a high visible location. So whether they're workers or visitors to a site, they know what the safety requirements are. There has to be an affirmation that they get from the state website through the Department of Health, the contractors do, and that affirmation to the state that they have read and understood the obligations that they're required to put in place to operate the site in accordance with the state guidance that has been implemented. Phase 1 will also include the hand hygiene stations that are going to be required, cleaning tools and disinfecting tools, and keeping a log. If you could go to the next slide. Thank you. So, you know, having that safety site plan is important. Implementing that plan is important, and posting it so anyone walks there can't, you know, plead any type of ignorance to what was going on at that site. Now, the first month, I should mention at this point, is going to require that we're not looking to violate any locations. It's more of a public awareness of what they need to have in place when the Department of Buildings Inspector also tasked with the mayor's executive order 123. I think the NYPD, the fire department, along with our agency, and also Department of Mental Health and Hygiene at certain intervals can go onto a site to ensure that they're in compliance. But we're going to be the lead agency from all indications on going out to these construction sites. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so the face coverings. Now, it's interesting. If they go to a construction site, if they're required to have face coverings if they're within 6 feet of one another. But if they're more than 6 feet from one another, then technically, you know, the face covering would not be required. But on a construction site, because especially a large scale construction site, you're gonna have a situation where workers are constantly interacting and you know, within that 6 feet distance, it's probably safer to wear the face covering for them. The cleaning and disinfection logs, if you see there on the screen, they're supposed to really keep a record of that. So if the Department of Buildings Inspector shows up to the site, they're going to ask for that log to make sure that the cleaning and disinfecting of construction equipment has been performed. There also has to be an indication of the number of people allowed in the confined space. For example, you may have a lift, an elevator lift doing a hoist doing work. There's supposed to be one person in that elevator or that lift at one given time. However, if there's an occupancy of, let's say, 4 people, then they have to do it by 50%, 2 people, and, you know, try to maintain that distance. And again, the face coverings is going to be an important aspect of that. Next slide, please. Now, just in case before I go to this one, the previous slide, the interaction with anyone that they may have had, and that's if anything were to occur where they can do the tracing. I think that's part of that rationale there. That's the last item on that's the previous slide. So what's, you know, construction that was non-essential prior to June 8th, it's not that it's considered essential, but they had a permit and they can go and commence with work. Now, prior to June 8th, anything with a healthcare facility, HPD Affordable Housing Project, They were allowed, they were considered essential construction, anyone that needed to secure a job site. But now everyone can pretty much go back to work on a construction site. Now, one of the things that we had to work on was that many of the job locations, if they were deemed non-essential construction prior to June 8th, they were found to be working, they were given a stop work order. So the agency had to go back in and remove that stop work order for a non-essential construction site. If any other job site received a stop work order that wasn't tied into the non-essential construction violation, they still have to make the request to lift the stop work order. So, I'm just throwing that out there because maybe some of the district managers or the borough president's office, we're working on a couple of issues right now for your office, Madam Borough President, with Home Depot being one, that we're trying to get that site up and running. And, and that's what we want to do. We want to get the sites back up and running. And that's important. Then the key is obviously the safety component, which was always there for the buildings department, but now you throw in the COVID-19 situation that exacerbates what is happening out there. And the other thing is that you want to be a little careful of contractors and construction activity that tries to now catch up with lost time. Construction loans are due, payments have to be made, and you don't want them to rush a job now to try to make up for that lost time. The other question that we've gotten from the industry was that, workers and visitors required to wear the face mask or some sort of face covering at a site. Yes, that's per the executive order, so there isn't any wiggle room there. And after the 30 days, next slide, please. After the 30 days, just to let you know, the violations will be, if they're found not to be in compliance, will be about $10,000 violation. So the incentive is to, maintain that compliance at all times. Yes, the tools have to be disinfected, and depending on the scale and scope of a job site, that's a lot of equipment that needs to be maintained, and that's why having that log is important to that scope of it. Next slide, please. Okay, now if there's any issues, this slide is just if anyone has any concern about safety regulations that are not being followed in compliance with what the state requirements are, the first thing and the best thing is to really just contact 301 to put the complaint in, and then we will send an inspector out there. Now, I mentioned earlier that we have that cycle system going. If we get a specific complaint, if one of the district managers or the borough president's office contacts us about a site that looks like it's not really being run properly, we are going to step up the inspections, periodic inspections for that particular site if there are complaints on it. If they're running a good site, then it'll be part of that normal cycle inspection process. So we're not waiting, by the way, for complaints to come in. We're going out to look at these sites regardless. And like I said, there's just shy of 34,000 sites here in the city of New York. And that's what we're doing with phase one.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Eliano, for that comprehensive presentation. What do you see changing in phase two for you, for the agency?
Yeah, with our agency, we're kind of fortunate as far as the number of city agencies involved with this, is that the construction had always been somewhere near the forefront, coming down from the governor's level. So we just had to anticipate how to react to it. Now, one of the things that we had to do was get all hands on deck in the agency, and my understanding has been that we had to get the even inspectors inspecting construction sites that wasn't necessarily their strong suit. Like we have elevator inspectors here in the buildings department. Elevator inspectors also have to go out to various number of job sites for construction inspection requirements. With the COVID-19 and having the safety compliance instilled in this particular aspect, I will say that you could be an elevator inspector and still go out to a site and make sure that they're in the safety compliance with the face coverings, disinfecting, keeping a log. So it kind of, every inspector doesn't have to be trained, where it takes 6 months of training to learn this. Within a day or two, they know what to look for. So for our agency, to get back to your question, is that, went from making sure they're not doing work, knowing that we were going to get to that point where they can do work, and going out to these sites to make sure they're in compliance. So for us, it hasn't really changed the mission. I will say, though, one of the things, though, not related to what the presentation was about today, is that much of the agency is now working offline, and most of the people that we normally had to, and you, as you know, Madam Borough President, walking into the Borough Hall, you would always see a long line of people coming in, and it wasn't just people looking to get married. There's the marriage licenses, offices there, the city clerk's office, but many people lining up to come into Borough Hall were coming into the buildings department. So we're having just about everyone file online any type of application. The question now is, now that the construction began in full operation, it's those buildings and those developments that need to get certificate of occupancy, those buildings that need to get a sign off and inspections that are outside and not related to COVID-19. But that was going to be there regardless.
Great. Any questions or comments from members of the cabinet? Well, as expected, the presentation was so comprehensive that there are no questions or comments.
That's probably because they want me to go get a haircut. I got to find time once they open up. Mark, I'm going to make sure I'm going to use a Queens barber, Mark.
I hope so, Tony. I hope so, man. You can use my barber if you want.
I like that one, Mark. Go on.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Iliano, again, for joining us this morning. You're absolutely welcome to stay. But again, we know your time is precious.
No.
Yes, please.
Oh, one thing I wanted to mention. Unfortunately, Borough Commissioner Lee would have also liked to have been part of this, but he's been pulled in a million different directions. So he sends his regards and appreciates everything your office has done for our agency.
Wonderful, and we appreciate him and you and the department. Thank you very much.
I don't know. Could you hear me?
Ms. Reddick, did you have a comment or question?
I had a question.
Yes.
I would like to know, in my district, there's a lot of construction, and I would like to know from Anthony, will buildings be approving after hours?
Excellent question, Yvonne. And we still review after hour variance permits, but the one little wrinkle with that process, and when I say wrinkle, it's not in a negative way, it's a positive way. They still have to physically come into the borough to make that request. And if there are any construction locations that you're concerned about, Yvonne, you're more than welcome and feel free. And I encourage that you reach out to us if you think that the after hour variance would not be warranted for this. The one thing the agency is concerned about, and it kind of dovetails to what I said earlier, is that the use of the after hour variance shouldn't be utilized in a way where you're trying to catch up with completing the work. The after hour variance, there's certain safety factors that involve why a job site may get an after hour variance to work. And the after hour variance, just to let you know, is to work after 6 p.m. on a weekday, and on weekends, an after hour variance would be required for after 6 p.m. on a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday. And So we'll review that. And if there's any concern that you have, please provide us the location, the address. And this is also for the other district managers, because I think Yvonne's bringing up a good point. You're probably going to see a lot of people trying to get an after-hour variance. Sometimes it's going to be justified, but other times it'll be denied. And keep in mind that sometimes the after-hour variance, if there's going to be some heavy activity of pedestrian vehicular activity at a particular job site during the work week, or where people will say, hey, listen, we want to do work because there's a lot of vehicular activity, and after hours, obviously it's lessened. But the reality is that many of the businesses outside of the construction industry aren't open. So there shouldn't be that type of a distraction. But like I said, Yvonne, by all means, let us know the location and we'll take a very good look at it if it's justified or not.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay. Again, thanks again, Mr. Iuliano. You're welcome to stay. So in the group chat here, I put a couple of links. I'm sure everyone is familiar with them, but just in case, I just wanted to have them all ready for you. This is from the governor's office, forward.ny.gov, which outlines various things about the phases of the reopening. The last link here, as you can see, the last two links are directly into phase 1 and phase 2. We are aiming to enter into phase 2 by next week, by June 22nd. There's a lot of things that need to be hit before we are able to enter into phase 2. But for a lot of the businesses that are under phase 2 that have been eager to open, it's hard to just flip a switch and just start business again. And so if you can make sure that these links, if you haven't already, familiarize yourself with these links, encourage all of the businesses that fall within phase 2 to do things like, get their affirmations, get their safety plans ready. Safety plans should be filled out. They do not have to be submitted to any agency. They just have to have it on site and ready to go. Check in with the businesses, see what they need to prepare for a phase 2 launch. Because again, our constituencies cannot just turn the switch on. It does take a little bit. You got to, if you're a business owner, you got to contact your employees again. You got to figure out schedules while adhering to social distancing measures, protections, etc. So all of these links should be very helpful to you. There's also the business reopening lookup tool. If any of your constituents are asking you, because I know you all are on the front lines, you get questions that run the gamut. If folks are wondering, which phase am I under? You can look up the Business Express, the reopening lookup tool. And give them guidance on which phase they're in, what they can be doing. But namely, their safety plans and their affirmations should be ready and on site at the very minimum before phase 2 officially launches. Are there any questions about this right now? Okay. Are there any other comments or questions that the cabinet members would like to share before we close the meeting? Ms. Coloris, I think I saw your mouth moving.
Yeah. I understand that we're going to be going into phase 2 in June 22nd, on June 22nd, thereabout. I have great concerns. I have 4 restaurant rows in my district. And when we were speaking earlier on, I had brought up the fact of the rules and regulations. I think that I know time is of the essence and businesses have to be open, but we shouldn't be waiting till the last minute to tell these restaurateurs what's going to happen. If you can expedite anything to help our businesses, the last thing we want is empty storefronts, and the rents are astronomical in my district. My businesses need help. So whatever you can do to expedite plans, please do so. Help us. That's it.
And we've been talking about that daily in the governor's control room calls about, it was phase 1 was a little bit easier to activate because it's the least amount of risk, if you will. in terms of potential community spread and things like that. Phase 2 is the stuff that's been ready to go, right? Everyone's at the gate needing to, not even just wanting to, needing to open. But how do we do that in a safe way? Because we're seeing, bumps and spikes in other parts of the country. That's something that is just unacceptable to us here in New York. So we've been talking about how do we, instead of, for phase 1, it was just turning it on. But phase 2 cannot just be turned on like a light switch. There has to be kind of a phase into phase 2. So we are working on that. Mr. Galuccio, did you have a question or comment? You're on mute.
Mr. Galuccio, you're still on mute.
Are you hearing anything?
We can hear you. I'm sorry, we can hear you now. We didn't hear anything before that.
Okay, I'm sorry, and I apologize. So the question was protocols. Are there anything right now being sent to the community boards with regard to opening up officially? Now, some of us are working remotely. Some of us are in the office. My staff is coming in part-time. I'm dying to hear if there's anything written yet with regard to officially opening up. I know there was nothing officially written about us closing down, but maybe with this phase 2 happening, we could be a little bit more clear on that. And I just, been wondering about it.
Confused about your last comment. Are you saying you did not get our email about closing the physical offices back in March?
No.
There are several emails.
I received all that.
Okay.
I received all that, and it was kind of sketchy, but that's okay. That's neither here nor there. That's water under the bridge. I'm not concerned about that anymore because working remotely certainly does, if you will, be funny, work. But now that we're close to phase 2, will there be anything sent out about us officially opening 5 days a week, full staff, et cetera, like other governmental offices? That's all I want to know. Simple.
It is simple. Well, I'd like to hear from you then. I understand, if not all, most of the community board offices have been operational remotely or with very skeletal staff, physical staff in your respective offices. Are you eager to go full on and have a return that physical presence into your office? Is that necessary for delivery of services to your respective districts?
Yeah. Okay. Here's a real political answer: yes and no, because we're all working successfully. I don't want to stir the pot, but I already told my staff to come in part-time every other day. We haven't worked out right now. I mean, it's as simple as that. But if there's something written that we have to all come in at the same time, I just want to know that so that I can inform my union employees, what the story is. In other words, I just want to know, as an FYI, general statement, if you're hearing anything with regard to community boards. That's all.
Any other district managers who can offer insights into what your needs or desires are in terms of a return to physical presence in your respective offices?
Frank, what we're doing is we go in. I have someone there in the morning, or I'm there in the morning. We just have a certain amount of coverage. It's not like we have people coming to the doors. And if someone does come to the door, we have a barrier where we can speak to them. We have masks available if they need to talk to people. But most of our stuff we're doing remotely. I don't know that as independent agencies we need to have. I think you need to work that out with your chair and your executive committee about when you want to get back there, because we're all sort of doing our own thing when it comes to covering the office and things like that. Right. Now, unless you have union issues where they need to have dictates from the city, I think we're best off doing what we're doing right now, which is our own thing.
Yeah. By the way, Mark, I totally agree. It was just a point of information. I thought that if there was something coming down, I wanted to be aware of it, particularly with our union employees. I don't have union problems. at all. And I'm just, like I said, just general point of information. If the mayor is saying all city agencies go back full time, of course, that would include us, even though we're semi, pseudo, whatever word you want to use, city agency. So, yeah, no, I appreciate that. And we're doing exactly the same thing. In fact, this morning I'm at the office and I put together a barrier. We have the mask at the desk. I really don't want to let anybody in without a mask. We have social distancing if they do come in, for the public anyway. But yeah, thank you, Mark. And I know I've spoken to almost everybody. Everybody's doing almost the same, yet a little bit different, which is typical of all 14 community boards. Like I said, it was just a point of information. I don't want
I
to get.
appreciate that.
Yeah,
That's great,
yeah.
Mr. Galuccio.
Well,
And speaking of masks,
Can I ask one question real quickly?
let me just finish, Mr. McMillan. Speaking of masks, Mr. Galuccio, I'm grateful that you brought that up at our last cabinet meeting. I understand that before the week's end of that meeting, you received the masks that you had requested, or at least a partial of it. So we did expedite that with City Hall. In terms of official written guidance that would be uniform across the community boards, that we will discuss that with the Community Affairs Unit of the Mayor's Office, which I understand you do meet daily. And if they have not given you that guidance or any kind of indicator of that guidance, we will discuss that with them and see what they are doing with all the other community boards across the city, if there is uniform. I haven't seen anything across the city for all community boards.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
But
you.
I would emphasize that you prioritize safety, maximize safety for your employees, but also the constituencies who would be coming in through the door physically.
Right, right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Madam Borough President.
Mr.
Appreciate it.
McMillan.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you before.
No, sorry.
I'd like to have some guidance. I know this is a multi-agency thing and it's probably more relevant to 1 and 2 and probably 6, but there's been restaurants that want to open up and maybe take some parking spaces to have additional space because they can't utilize all of the inside space that they have inside of their restaurants. I don't know if there's been any sort of multi-agency task force with DOT and possibly small business services, but it would be helpful to sort of have guidance if that's going on, if it's going on in different regions of the state, since you are on these daily calls. So if restaurants approach the community board for guidance on how to do that, what can we tell them? How can we assist them in making that happen?
Could you tell me a little bit more about what you mean? So the restaurants want more parking space?
No, not more parking, more space to have
like
tables.
outdoor seating?
Outdoor seating, correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And then
in front of their buildings, as opposed to if they have a yard. So you have the sidewalk aspect to it, but suppose they wanted to, as they're doing in different states, taking a parking space or two that might be right in front of their building. Is that something that would be considered?
That's interesting. And are those parking spaces, who owns it?
Well, the city would own it. It's DOT property, but would that be something
the restaurants that you're talking about in your district, are the adjacent or nearby parking lots are city owned?
No, I'm talking about on the street in front of the restaurant.
So the outdoor seating falling into the street, the lanes?
Correct.
The parking spots?
The parking lanes.
I
correct.
see. I think it depends on the street. Could you, after this meeting, email us some of the areas that you're thinking of specifically?
Sure.
I think that's an interesting idea. Mr. McLeland? Let me unmute you.
Morning, Borough President.
Hi, good morning.
I have a question. As you know, last week there were rumors swirling around about a mobile testing site, and then one popped up on Friday morning in front of Borough Hall. I was wondering, is there any way that we can get an accurate list of where these testing sites will be so we can alert the community from HHC?
I wish I had a different answer. We were just as surprised as you were to see that pop-up testing center in front of Borough Hall. We understand it was a one-time thing, one shot, one day testing center. That has been a continuous point of confusion because the testing sites are managed by different entities, right? It's not exactly centralized. You got the state ones, you got the city ones, and then you've got all these non-public entities running testing sites. The ones that are H&H run are ostensibly on their website. So if that should be any guidance. However, the one that you're talking about last week caught us as much by surprise as it did for you. And so they know that they will let us know in advance for anything relating to Borough Hall. But for the other side, are you talking about your district in particular? Any like other places in your district?
Yeah, I mean, for all the community boards, because like I
Yeah.
said, there were rumors on Monday. I couldn't
Yeah.
confirm or deny. And then I kind of looked foolish on Friday when
Yeah.
people were calling me up and said it's right in front of your office. So I was
Yeah.
wondering, you know, in
Yeah.
any community board, can we have, you know, advance notice?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Got it. Ms. Colores, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, Madam Borough President, thank you for acknowledging me. What Mark was talking about is something that CAU is working on with DOT, and I thought what used to be DCA. That's something along the lines of what I was bringing up earlier. So they're looking at certain streets in order to open up the parking lane of certain streets in order to have tables and chairs put out. So what's going to happen is if there's a bus route on those streets will not be compliable to these laws. The problem is, and I mentioned this to CAU, they don't have a community board representative from each borough of each district because, like, for example, Mr. Gresh is the one who's dealing with this for Queens. But the problem is that we're more in tune with our communities, even if it were somebody from Borough Hall that we could place our concerns with. In my district, we do have certain street events where they are able to reroute the buses temporarily. Maybe there's some kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for? An ability for late in the day, 8 p.m. and beyond, to only reroute the buses so that these restaurants can thrive. There are lots of options, but they're not being addressed yet. And I'm concerned about the fact that phase 2 is coming in just a few days and we're not able to speak to these things. We don't want empty storefronts. So I hear what Mark is saying, and that's what he's talking about.
Okay. We'll talk to that's a city DOT matter in terms of altering the street lanes and the parking lane,
the mayor's
lanes.
office.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay.
Yes, Madam President.
All right. We'll talk to them.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. So our next meeting will be July 20th. It's a Monday. And as usual, every year, the July meeting is a joint meeting with the Borough Board. So Monday, July 20th at 5:30 p.m. We will plan to do it online, again, to maximize and prioritize your safety. And if you haven't already, please try to work out the video functions on your respective devices so that we can all see each other. If there are no other questions, I will adjourn this meeting, and I look forward to seeing you, if not July 20th, if not before July 20th, on July 20th. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.